Greetings! Welcome back to Disenthrall. I am Patrick Smith. Today we have special guest Eso. I think I should have asked him how you pronounce. Is it? Well, you're there. Eso, Eso. What do you like to be called?
It's just Eso. That's the name that I'm going by nowadays. That's because the channel used to be called Esoteric Entity. Now it's just Back Alley Philosophy.
All right. Well, welcome to the show, Eso. He is an anarchist libertarian YouTuber who identifies with and messages politically in the 19th century individualist tradition. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on. It seems like a very nice program, and my God, it makes me nervous to stream with such little sleep.
Uh-oh. Hey, Rika, good to have you on have you in the comments.
I'm always nervous to stream. That's just me. But yeah, I could explain myself just fine, and I can hold the conversation.
All right, so this will be the second time I have interviewed somebody who likes to appear in public as a cartoon avatar of some kind. The last one was an animated frog. This one appears to be a fox. Can you maybe kind of just start by telling us like who you are, what you do, and why you choose to kind of represent yourself using this avatar?
Well, my name is Eso, of course. We'd already established that. Who I am in person, I mean, I guess it's kind of difficult to go over that all in just a very short summary, but in how it relates to what we're talking about today, which is counter economics mainly, I am a counter economist. That means that as a libertarian political strategy and in pursuit of my own material financial interests, I trade in gray and black markets, both to mainly to subvert the political economy and to obtain and to strengthen the networks through which people trade in these gray and black markets to create more financial stability and to create more production under the radar in these sort of under the table firms.
Okay, so in your day-to-day life, you do not sort of participate in the what would you call it, white market, the traditional under the government thumb market, right?
Yes, the political economy, which how that is defined as I am using it and as was described by Konkin, the very first libertarian who proposed counter-economics, is the areas of the market which are controlled by the state either via regulatory capture, finance manipulation through the banking industry, which is manipulated by the state, and the firms which benefit from state subsidy and are able to externalize costs more than they would be able to in a free market.
And so you asked if you could appear on the show today, and it was because I think you want to share some knowledge about agorism versus political action. Is that a good summary?
Yes, I think that would be a great summary. My main reason for wanting to be on is I have quite a few criticisms with how libertarians present themselves politically. I think there is absolutely no reason why libertarianism should not be the dominant political position in society. And that is mainly because of mismanagement by political organizations which label themselves as libertarians, and a fundamentally misguided approach to politically messaging based on sort of what is traditional in the current political system. And
well, that and 18 years of public school, right?
Right.
That indoctrination has to help a little bit.
That certainly is probably the biggest part of it. And the other thing that I wanted to come on and talk about today would be counter economics, and how I think that is essentially the best means to achieve political change in a libertarian direction.
Okay. The last thing I want to ask, and then I'm going to give a quick stream update, would be, are these criticisms of Libertarian Party activism, are any of these things directed at me, or is this more of a general discussion?
Well, in a broader sense, it's more just the general messaging behind how libertarians describe what libertarianism is and how it's sold to people, and how politics in the sort of mainstream circles are internalized. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case that's not the only way politics function. I think that is a specific approach to politics which is ideological and is not necessarily the objective way of approaching the political system. So I suppose I would say yes and no. You specifically are a libertarian, but one of the biggest problems which this sort of approach to messaging has created is it is essentially made it so libertarianism has no null hypothesis, in that there is no actual trait you could point to within if you accept the Libertarian Party approach and you accept the idea that you have to attempt to present libertarianism as if it is something which appeals to and conforms to the political affiliations of leanings which advocate for the state. Well, then you get into these weird positions where you get liberals attempting to identify as libertarians, or minarchists attempting to identify as libertarians, even though they very clearly are proponents of political rule as a concept, which is something that libertarian philosophy at its core fundamentally rejects.
By definition. Yeah, I haven't disagreed with a single thing you've said yet. Absolutely. The one thing I wanted to point out today, because this is brand new for the channel, we are streaming to Mixer in addition to our other platforms today. So if you're looking to get away from Facebook, which we are currently effectively banned on, or shadow banned on, we also have Mixer in the mix. Oh, that was an unintended pun. Sorry for that. And
I'm legitimately surprised you're even on Facebook, to be perfectly honest.
My platform is about activism, and to proselytize, you have to go to where the heathens are, so to speak. So I will go wherever there are people.
Don't mean, yeah,
oh, you mean haven't gotten completely banned yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like, I understand why you would use Facebook from perspective of messaging and creating a platform. It's just, how have you not been completely banned yet? I mean, I got banned from Twitter like a year and a half ago, and it seems like the standards are just getting more and more strict. Yeah. As the government gets more freaked out about social media, slowly making it completely irrelevant.
Absolutely. And in fact, I'm actually working on spinning up a Gab server that will function under the Disenthrall name, under the Disenthrall platform, and we'll be able to federate with all the other, Gab and Mastodon servers just as an alternative. Right now, well, we're digressing, but the last thing I'll say is that, like, right now I see the Gab platform as the most viable competitor to all the social networks. It's very functional. It's plenty feature rich. I think if I was going to move to something today, I think it would be Gab. But that said,
yeah, I've been a pretty vocal proponent. I mean, a pretty vocal opponent of Dissenter, mainly because that was advertised as a as a free speech alternative comment section, and really it was just used as a glorified tracker to undermine VPNs. So
I don't see any evidence that it's a glorified tracker. Some people sent me the video that you made on it that I very much disagreed with. So I will leave it to you to decide which of these subjects that we focus on today, because we probably don't have time to do anything else. And so pick one. Should we do political activism versus agorism, or do you want to dive into dissenter? I would suggest that maybe we save dissenter for another time.
Let's talk about agorism versus political activism, though I would argue that that is a false dichotomy. Every agorist is fundamentally a political activist, but not everyone who engages in counter-economics is an agorist. And that's fundamentally why I would argue that counter-economics has such a leg up over other libertarian strategies, or just any political strategy employed by any political affiliation. And that's why I would argue fundamentally why libertarianism can appeal to everyone, or it should be probably the most popular philosophy, and that's because libertarianism doesn't the way that political affiliations are presented in society today is the state socially engineers people into internalizing their interests as being interchangeable with philosophy. This is done through proposing legislative fiat as a policy proposal, telling people that if they want to have their interests met, they have to change policy proposals, which is done by voting and conforming to the state. Legislative fiat, by definition, is the use of violence to enforce these standards, which are proposed and created by the state. So essentially what they're doing is they are using violence to browbeat people into seeing the political economy as being the only way through which they can have their interests met, and the political system in general. So libertarians can never be successful if they attempt to organize within the political system, because effectively what they are proposing is legislative fiat at that sense, and what they're proposing is establishing their goals through legislative fiat. And one of the biggest problems that creates in terms of messaging is that it creates you are essentially forced to only appeal to people of certain material interests. You have to choose between someone with low time preferences or high time preferences. You can't appeal to both if you're utilizing party-archist rhetoric and strategy within the political system. And
all right, I want to. Sorry to interrupt. I want to back up because we've used a lot of terms here that probably not everyone listening is familiar with. And before we get into defining them, I just want to hit a couple of these comments. I want to say hello to Mark. Good to see you again. Roberto Matos from Brazil. What's up, man? Good to see you. Good to have Brazil checking in. Patrick is a Nazi confirmed. Yeah, apparently my Nazi status is confirmed by wanting to start a Gab server. So thanks for that, Phobes. Good. Yeah, so let's define three terms that I've heard pop up so far. An agorist, because you said that not everyone that participates in counter economic behavior is an agorist. And then the other one was, libertarian. Obviously, we've probably, that's the one we're probably familiar with. Not all people professing to be libertarian are consistent with their own principles. That's probably a good way of saying it. And then partyarchy was the last one that you just said. So if we could just quickly, let's go through those.
I could do that very quickly. Agorism is a political methodology within broader anarchist philosophy, which is essentially a direct action approach, that being an approach which doesn't attempt to go through a political system, doesn't attempt to go through another entity. It's individuals themselves engaging in actions intended to achieve a political goal. And an agorist strategy is one which utilizes gray and black market networking in order to subvert the political economy, in the aims of making it fundamentally impossible for the state to continue funding itself.
So the distinction you're drawing between a real agorist and a non-real agorist would be their intent. If given two people, right, both participating counter-economically, but one is just doing so out of, let's say, selfishness, expediency, or just because they want to be rebellious, and the other one is doing it for the purposes of political activism. That's the distinction between what you'd call agorist and not?
Right, and there is a notable difference between the two. Well, for one thing, they have different internalizations of their own marginal preferences. Agorists tend to be driven more by psychic profit, that being non-material profit, but internalized benefit from like a political perspective, which drives them. Konkin himself, he operated back in the 70s and 80s when he was giving out literature and operating at a loss. He was asked about why he was operating at a loss, and that's what he explained, is that he derived greater psychic profit than material profit for his actions. And another different incentive, it changes or at least it creates a better explanation of the sort of counter-economic associations one is more predisposed to engaging in more often. An agorist specifically, an ideological agorist specifically, would associate more in industries which are specifically subversive and intended to make it more difficult for the state to function. Communications, finance, trying to make it more consistent to create homebrewed fuel. Those would find.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Those would be. That's okay. Those would be a few examples. Whereas just someone who is engaging in counter economics, there's not real, like, that is really just that could be anybody, as long as it is more profitable. They deem it to be more profitable to associate in that counter market than going to a white market firm, and that's a lot more common than ideological agorism. In fact, most towns have counter economies. Flea markets would be a pretty good example. And then there are, of course, some farmers markets. Some aren't, but many of them are. In fact, it's pretty funny. The mainstream media recently, by which I mean it was Daily Mail, I think. It was one of those, I don't think it was Daily Mail, it was one of those really regressive salon type websites. Ran an article about farmers markets being a hotbed for fascism because it was untaxed goods. being traded.
Okay.
So
it looks like we got
yeah,
a couple people trying Mixer out. So hello to Mixer. Hey, ANCAP, good to see you there. Thanks for the follow. Zachary Colley donated $5 through Super Chat. He says, which cryptocurrencies and commodities would you endorse for agorist purposes? I personally favor Litecoin, Dash, and Silver. I personally favor Monero.
Okay. Well, it depends on the community and the market, because that's it, the utility for the cryptocurrency is going to change depending on a lot of circumstances. But I think broadly, based on what we've seen in actual hollow states which exist right now, that being another term I should probably define, we see Dash and Litecoin being prominent in hollow states. Do you want me to define a hollow state, or?
If we're getting off topic, I want to keep it moving forward. So,
okay, it's not off topic. It actually. Okay.
So, let me just give my 2-minute spiel on Monero then. So, if there's only really two utilities in my mind that make cryptocurrencies worth even looking at right now. One is the ability to transfer money counter-economically, meaning for the express purpose of transferring money in a way that you would not normally be allowed to. And to that end, if it isn't private or as close to perfectly private as possible, I see almost no use for it. So like Bitcoin in general, I used to be very bullish on, but once it becomes not private, it becomes it gains most of the competitors, or it competes with PayPal, and PayPal is much faster and much easier, and as long as you're not getting your PayPal account locked because you're participating in quote unquote hate speech, in which case Bitcoin does have a market advantage. Most cryptocurrencies have very little utility over PayPal, except for those, minor use cases where your assets might get seized or your account might get shut down, or, you're trying to send money overseas or whatever. Then even PayPal might have utility, except that, even Bitcoin might have utility. But again, for most of those counter-economic purposes, you need privacy. And that's why Monero is my focus when it comes to crypto, because it provides, in my opinion, the most important utility of cryptocurrency, which is the privacy. So,
well, that's fundamentally the main reason why people trade in cryptocurrency. But another thing that's often overlooked, and this is why normies even get into cryptocurrency, is the fact that cryptocurrency, well, depending on the cryptocurrency, of course, every wallet is different in how how the blockchain is fundamentally programmed, but broadly speaking, they have more utility than using banks from a position of asset security. There's, of course, the privacy aspect, and how there's fundamentally no interest rate manipulation or arbiters controlling the currency. Well, then there's also the fact that they can be traded with with a lower transaction fee. Take Bitcoin, for example. The transaction fee is constant in the network, regardless of the amount that you're trading. Whereas with a bank, the transaction fee necessarily multiplies depending on the amount that you're trading. And that creates an incentive for financiers to use cryptocurrency over banks, because to invest in something or to trade a large amount fundamentally requires a lower transaction fee. And that would be just one example.
So let's go back and define partyarchy, because that's kind of the next step in the conversation, I believe.
Well, we haven't defined libertarianism, which the way that I'm using libertarian, like as I mentioned, it because of the fact that libertarians got in bed with a lot of these mainstream political movements, the meaning of libertarianism it kind of got lost around the 1930s and the 1940s. Because what happened is libertarians essentially they made an alliance with conservatives because of their fear of state socialism. It's a very valid fear, of course, but yeah. So some of the bigger figures who were active in libertarianism, such as Benjamin Tucker and what remained of the Boston Anarchists, started trying to ally with conservatives, and that led to Murray Rothbard coming along and attempting to fundamentally separate libertarianism from these certain marginal preferences and attempt to define it as something which complements conservatism, when libertarianism in the 19th century, it fundamentally prior to that moment, it was simply seen as a metaphysical principle. And there are 2 points which you can point to, sorry for the redundancy, but which actually define libertarianism. An essay by William Belsham entitled On Liberty and Necessity, published originally in 1789, and the 1802 edition of the British Critic. In William Belsham's essay, the essay was fundamentally about free will versus determinism, and libertarianism was defined there as a philosophy which proposes free will as its fundamental concept, and because it proposes free will, the libertarian would argue that every person is fundamentally a moral agent and is entitled to their moral agency. And its next known use in the 1802 edition of the British Critic was specifically an individualist criticism of the British monarchy, specifically using that exact concept that because people are moral agents, we are entitled to our moral agency. And the conclusion of that, which was established in the 1802 edition of the British Critic, was that because we're moral agents entitled to our moral agency, it is not possible for political rule to justify itself due to the principle of non-contradiction, where political rule fundamentally would be asserting that a moral agent would be able to establish dominion over another moral agent, and that is fundamentally an inconsistency, is what libertarianism proposes.
So Rika says Benjamin Tucker is her backup boyfriend to Spooner. And Zachary Colley says, am I the only compatibilist around here? So I have sort of been forced to reluctantly move to a position of free will not being a thing lately. And I've done a couple streams on that. And we've also had several streams talking about the differences between sort of the agorist strategy versus partyarchy. In fact, I can't link them right now, but I'll look them up and maybe throw them in the description. We had a couple of really good conversations on this, and at the time I was, not running for not governor of Texas, and so we had some interviews, sort of trying to elicit my opinions on political activism versus agorism, and those were really good conversations. So what specific points would you like to make? Like speaking to the typical modern libertarian, what would you like to tell them?
Okay, well, first, I guess it would be helpful to actually, define libertarianism, and this is different. It seems very similar from a superficial perspective to when a lot of these post-Marxists pretending to be anarchists will say libertarianism was originally a socialist doctrine, blah, blah, blah. But no, it's actually important to establish this point because it actually carries a couple of politically expedient positions which otherwise would not be able to be utilized. And as I was getting into earlier, the main one is that that would mean what I've established earlier of what libertarianism is. That would mean fundamentally that libertarianism is what is known as an anti-political allegiance, a political allegiance attempting to propose a sort of central legislative fiat in its sort of idea of how the state should function or what it thinks the state should do, which ultimately is a threat of violence towards people who have certain marginal preferences. Libertarianism rejects this premise, this approach fundamentally, and libertarianism instead, as a consequence, is able to simultaneously appeal to every material interest. So that would probably be the first and fundamental advantage which libertarianism has. But because libertarians they attempt to treat libertarianism as if it is something which complements authoritarian political allegiances, they fundamentally can't utilize this strategy with any consistency because they have to fundamentally sacrifice their own first principles in the process.
So, I probably more than most people was challenged by the typical minarchist style libertarian, and so I'm very, very familiar with the way that they'll come at you. So let me try and role play here. So one of the things that they would ask you is, well, what is your definition of a libertarian, and why?
I've defined that already.
And why is it the definition?
Well, I explained that already.
Okay, maybe restate in shorter form.
Okay, well, libertarianism fundamentally, as it was first initially proposed, is a free will doctrine which asserts that moral agency is the basis of human action, and because of that, it's inconsistent to argue for political rule, and therefore libertarianism fundamentally rejects, as a political doctrine, any form of political rule. And there's no real argument to be made for minarchism. I mean, there are a couple of different reasons why the minarchist conception of the state and libertarianism are wrong.
Well, hold on. So I agree that your I don't have a problem with your definition of what is a libertarian. Are you just appealing to the original creator as why your definition is the definition? Because certainly what happens now is a bunch of other people come along and say, well, I think it's something different. And what they'll also say is, like, most of us think that it's something different. Most of us think libertarianism is compatible with minarchy. What say you to that?
Well, that's what I was about to explain. Minarchy creates this problem because of accepting political rule where it no longer has any real criticism of the state. So libertarians have to reject political rule because otherwise there's no actual principled argument against the state. From a minarchist perspective, for instance, what exactly would be the argument against North Korea?
So, I mean, I can keep playing devil's advocate with you if you like. So, you know, what if they're not so concerned with like perfect consistency? What if they're, you know, all the other political parties are perfectly happy with, you know, even these minarchist libertarians will say things like, you know, well, we do consent to, you know, certain things that the state does, therefore there is no contradiction. And who are you to say, you know, otherwise? Like, you're not the king of the word libertarian.
Well, are you asking me to respond to that, or are you just giving me another example of something minarchists could say? But I was going to, in response to that, that's essentially just an argument for state-secured privilege backed up by force. So that's not a libertarian argument. That's a I'm entitled to monopoly privilege argument, which is not a libertarian position. It's also not a very practical position, I would argue.
They would say that you're begging the question. They're trying to get you to say why your definition of libertarian is the definition, and your response has just been to say that those positions aren't libertarian.
Well, my response has been to explain why those positions are philosophically inconsistent with the idea of rejecting political rule. But what I've been trying to get to is this isn't necessarily, like, this is something where the sort of framework itself is flawed in the case of the minarchist perspective. And their approach to politics is conceptually flawed in a couple of ways, which is why when I argue with minarchists, I have quite a bit of experience, so nothing you're saying to me really is new, honestly. But when I approach them, I challenge their idea of what a state is and how the state functions, because their problem fundamentally is they have this idea that the state is fundamentally a firm that operates around philosophy, that people can have their own ideological approaches which will influence the function of states. And I think that I would argue that is fundamentally wrong, and there's an overwhelming amount of evidence to prove that. For one, we can point to structural incentives throughout the government which incentivize the government to expand its influence, and those are innate to the government's ability of attempt to continue funding itself. For instance, we have police quotas, and we have these pharmaceutical cartels, which are established by state monopoly privilege. And that is specifically done with the intent because the state has to expand its influence over society, because as the political economy expands, it has to increase the amount of revenue it taxes, and by doing that, there is less revenue in the political economy. And then if we're going to look deeper at the sort of motivations behind state firms, there seems to be this idea. Take, for example, a cop who abuses people or beats up on people.
No, cops don't do that. What are you talking about? They're heroes and servants of justice.
Well, their idea seems to be just that the state says that they function in whatever my interest is, and therefore that's what they do. But fundamentally, there is an antagonism towards the interest of the people the state claims to rule over, and every service which the state attempts to involve itself in. Both in the payment model of how the state funds itself and how the state actually exerts its influence over society. So the problems with the state being abusive, as minarchists would argue, it's not ideological corruption, it is the core function of the state being realized. That's the reason for, say, for example, fractional reserve banking. It's not because a couple of corrupt politicians handed the keys over to a bunch of bankers. No, it's because fundamentally that's what the state needed to continue functioning at the rate that it was.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to find much disagreement with anyone here on pretty much anything you've said. So, like, where would you like to go from here with this conversation?
Well, just what I was explaining fundamentally is that the sort of minarchist idea is that, well, we can establish a libertarian state and, well, you can shatter minarchism pretty easily by pointing out things such as structural incentives, or even the idea that state actors are directly in pursuit of their own interests created by the model of firm that is the state. They are necessarily antagonistic towards how non-state actors internalize their interests. The idea of a state being anything other than a geopolitical unipolar empire, or being essentially the war grounds of a series of other empires, that's a fiction. As long as there are states, the world will always look something like it does currently. And the only way, from even a practical perspective, to break that is to work to undermine the state.
Yep. Verbal Armament says, sup, chattel property slaves. What's up, man? Good to have you on the stream. Face Value says, he worked for 8 hours today, 2 for the government and 6 for myself. That's what's up. Yes.
Yeah, I worked for 6 and I got 4 hours of sleep last night, but I'm good. I'm usually this wordy, honestly.
Yeah, your reputation precedes you.
It's just there's a lot of stuff to go over, and it seems like a lot of these concepts, there's a lot of depth to them, and a lot of people say I'm a bit too wordy. Well, by a lot of people, I mean the co-host of my podcast, Filthy Heretic. I'll occasionally, and other than him, I'll occasionally get presented with that. But the problem is it's difficult to quickly summarize an idea where you have like 12 chains of logical progression required in explaining the full concept you're attempting to articulate.
I think there's a lot of human brains out there, and certain brains take certain styles of speech and communication to reach. So I don't disparage anybody's attempts to do anything. I might have a show coming up, in fact, with the guy that we did the guy that disagreed with our guillotine march wanted to probably come back on. He said that he felt I think he said bamboozled by the last show. Not bamboozled. I forgot what he said, but he disagreed with that form of activism. Said that it directly contradicts the goals of voluntarists, and so I guess a good example, not to keep bringing him up, but Kokesh is probably one of the rare examples of somebody that I've gone out of my way to point out as a bad actor in the space. In general, I let people do their thing because, like I said, there's so many different kinds of brains out there, and everybody takes a different kind of communication. And the way you talk and the way you communicate is going to work on some people, and the way I talk and communicate and do my activism is going to work on other people. So do your thing, as long as you're not hurting anybody. But if you're hurting somebody, then I'll say something. See something, say something.
I'd agree fundamentally with that. I don't think if you've actually looked at the sort of evidence of things that Kokesh has done and his sort of backstory with covert military operations, there's a lot of ambiguity there. He very clearly is a bad actor who has sort of ulterior motives behind what he's doing. I would criticize a lot of libertarian figures such as Stefan Molyneux for their sort of political messaging and their approach to how they attempt to present their message, because a lot of people, they underestimate the power of narrative structures and how they're presenting things, and they don't realize, you can come to a certain conclusion, or you can propose an argument which has the conclusion of libertarianism being good, but if it is structured in a way which is designed to lead people towards thinking otherwise, you're going to do more harm than good. And that's usually what my criticism of a lot of these libertarian figures is. And that's, I wouldn't call them bad actors, because, people are sort of brought up for the first 14 to 15 years of their life in government schools to internalize the state as something which is a representation of some vague sense of general interest. And
I was laughing at face value. He said, "Isn't Molyneux a Minecraft channel now?" I don't know if you've seen his recent videos.
Yeah, he actually is doing Minecraft Let's Plays now.
It's terribly cute. It's terribly cute. He's having a good time with his kid. That's awesome.
Yeah, there's no problem with that. It's just, now I think that's probably the low point of his channel. I hope that he gets back to where he was.
The low point was definitely Trump. I'd rather see Minecraft videos wall to wall than asking people to vote for Trump.
Fair enough. But yeah, Kokesh runs for president, threatens people who are criticizing him, and as I already touched upon, he's got his history with the U.S. government and military operations, which is really sketchy if you put that together with the stuff that he's doing in politics right now. So yeah, I would agree that Kokesh is a bad actor. The only thing really, I would still probably recommend a lot of, there's a stream that he did a while ago with Kevin Carson of C4SS, and I'd recommend people watch that, because that was a great stream. Went over a lot of obscure areas of discussion regarding Austrian economics, and that was probably the best stream where you're going to find that sort of information. I would argue Kevin Carson is, by the way, another figure whom I used to have a lot of respect for, or at least somewhat, but he's been going off the deep end lately.
Uh-oh.
So,
yeah, there's only probably maybe 10 prominent voluntarist libertarian thinkers out there. So right now we're in a position where when one of them goes wrong or flies off a cliff, it's pretty painful for the movement. Like, Molyneux has years of really good videos, and it would be awesome to be able to refer people to those videos without having to spend 5 minutes on caveats. So that just means that I need to get off my ass and make some content to match it, so that I can stop doing that. So that's a charge to us,
absolutely. Absolutely, and even in like the YouTube libertarian commentary community, quite a few of the bigger personalities were they closed down their channels this year. Mr. Dapperton, Hoodie Demon, just two examples. Atomic ANCAP, which I don't think he'd be considered very prominent, but he had like 4,000 subscribers. He stopped making videos. So is overall, I'd say 2019 has been a pretty low point for libertarianism because we've lost quite a few people.
Not an argument.
That's the only good thing I have from him right now is that meme. All right, sorry. Yeah, so
yeah, not an argument. That's a classic.
Yeah. So the audience that you're probably talking to right now. The thing I wanted to say to that was, I know that there has been a semi-prolific group of voluntarist anarchist types, ANCAPs, on YouTube that are oftentimes represented by avatars of various kinds. And they have put out quite a bit of content, much of it very good. I've always seen like a lot of drama in that space, though, and I don't know why. But it has certainly reminded me over and over that the real life activism seems to get a lot more traction and be a lot less drama filled. So that's why I've really focused a lot of my time and attention on doing things in the meat space. But you're saying that a lot of those content creators have shut down their channels now. That's probably a bad thing.
Yeah, it really is. And, there was sort of a boom of libertarianism because of that community in late 2016, early 2017. And there are two reasons why you could prove this with Google search trends. In early 2017, individualist anarchism, anarcho-capitalism, voluntarism exploded in the search results. But yeah, there were two things which happened which I think made libertarianism so big. It's probably, even though we're at a low point, I would still say it's probably one of the biggest points for libertarianism in the last 200 years, at least in terms of people who are actual libertarians and actual libertarian messaging getting out there. But the two things that happened was, one, the 2016 election that caused a lot of people to become disillusioned with the political system because the state made a critical error in how they were messaging that, which was essentially, I think fundamentally, for whatever reason, there was a lot of emphasis put on both candidates being undesirable towards your interests, but you need to support one, even in the sort of mainstream state-controlled media. That was the message which was propagated. There was no, it wasn't one of them's better than the other, or to each specific political allegiance. Yeah, they meet your political allegiance. That was just overtly the message which was emphasized, is if the other one is elected, then you're screwed, but there's no real selling point for them. There's no real advertising point for them. Well, that just caused a lot of people to become disillusioned with the political system rather than whatever intended effect they thought they were going to accomplish. Another thing is that there was a rather famous video which came out at the time, I don't think gets a lot of credit, which was questions libertarians have for statists, that featured quite a few still pretty popular YouTubers such as Freedom Tunes, Lauren Southern, and Larkin Rose, etc., which was responded to by a lot of the skeptic channels while they were still going through their heyday. And that consequently brought a lot of attention to some of the bigger libertarian personalities at the time. That actually personally is how I myself was inspired to start making content and was inspired to finally become an anarchist, is because I found Dapperton at the time going by Anarchy Ball in that compilation, and I started watching a lot of his content.
Yeah.
And through him, what were you going to say?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
And through him, I started reading some Austro-libertarian literature. Particularly, I used to be big into Rothbard, but I've since developed quite a few criticisms of his strategy as I went over in today's stream. And also, I think that he, like, towards the end of his life particularly, he started engaging in a lot of, like, really shady political stuff because of his interests in the Libertarian Party. So in terms of Austro-libertarians, I'm more of a Roderick Long, Gary Chartier kind of guy, more than I am a Rothbard, Hoppe kind of guy.
So let me just catch up on addressing some of the comments here. A couple people are talking about Bitbutter being a good source of content. He does have some really cool animated videos talking about the non-aggression principle. As Pyro Pete says, though, he does not consider the NAP. Pyro Pete says he doesn't believe in the NAP. I don't really like that language. I think it's more nuanced than that. But he has some criticisms of the non-aggression principle. If you search my channel for it, you can find a takedown video I did of his criticism. He wrote an article criticizing the non-aggression principle, and I did a rebuttal video of that. So you can search the channel if you want to read that.
I've been looking to do a response to consequentialist approaches to libertarianism, but yeah, fundamentally, I think my main criticism of that approach is that, sort of like with empiricism, it can't construct a cohesive truth claim. It's not arguing anything fundamentally other than this is my own sort of relative interpretation of the info that I've seen in society, and therefore I've come to this conclusion that the state is bad. Well, the problem with that sort of framework is that there's no real argument against somebody coming along and just saying, well, nuh-uh, I think based on my relative interpretation of info that the state is good and that that the state is beneficial. It has no sort of cohesive truth claim, and it doesn't negate any other proposition. It's fundamentally a meaningless assertion.
So Verbal Armament says, aren't libertarians statists? And Face Value says libertarians want the government to have a monopoly on violence. If you're talking about what most people that call themselves libertarians would say and believe and want, then I think you're right. But they hold their own beliefs inconsistently. So the degree to which you think the government should not exist is the degree to which you're libertarian. So those that hold space for government and call themselves libertarians are just inconsistent libertarians.
Yeah, fundamentally, libertarianism is anarchism. The two concepts are interchangeable, even though one could possibly argue that the sort of development of the two of them are not dependent on one another, as anarchy, that term and how it's known, no rulers, that verbiage and concept can be found 3,000 years ago, back in periods of Rome and Greece.
Yeah, let's see. One of those guys says, but you're not a real anarchist if you're not vegan. I think you're joking. I'm going to pretend that you're joking. If you're not joking, I'm pretty sure you're joking. But if you're not joking, tell me and we'll address that. Let's see. What else? We got some good comments in here. Minarchists are still statist. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a degree thing. The degree to which you... And that's for all labels. That's for all names and labels of anything. You know, the degree to which you are a carnivore is the degree to which you eat meat. The degree to which you're a statist is the degree to which you support the existence of a state. This is just how languages and definitions work, right?
Well, in fact, sort of what I was explaining earlier is that minarchism, it's sort of an incoherent concept because, it's implied in the term minarchism. Somebody who believes that a government should be limited. Okay, well, we know that in lived reality, governments are not limited by philosophy. Governments will do anything they can to achieve their own material interests and to fundamentally deprive people to the best of their ability of the ability, sorry for the redundancy, to conceptualize anything other than the state being a representation of their interests.
Yeah, so somebody said that, okay, so one of those guys was joking. He said he's making fun of Mark Stevens' position. Now, I always get these two people mixed up, and I thought that one of them makes an argument that says if you, eating meat is a violation of the non-aggression principle. They're both named Mark. Is this both of their positions? Guys, you can answer that in the comments. Are they both, sort of vegetarian by principle, or is it just one of them?
Yeah, the vegan libertarian position fundamentally is rooted from this idea that there is no difference between a sentient and a sapient being. So they have this idea that animals are moral agents or sort of non-sapient sentient beings have moral agency, even though provably they can't internalize moral concepts because they lack sapience.
I know a conversation with one or both of them is coming soon in my life, so I want to be respectful until that conversation happens. I saw that. Okay. I think Larkin had a debate with this guy. Which one is this? Not Passio, right? That's Stevens. So Larkin did a debate with Stevens, and I don't think it ended well. Like it got heated and they broke it off. So we'll see how that goes.
I was just sort of generally explaining that position because I've had a couple of run-ins with vegans.
Yep.
And as someone who personally studies genetics because I am interested in transhumanism to an extent, I think the vegan scientific argument is very disingenuous because it's fundamentally rooted from that idea there's no biological difference between a animal without sapience and a human, a sentient sapient being. And anyone who studied basic biology, or at least the sort of brain function of a dog, for instance, would know essentially they don't really have moral agency. They just sort of operate on an instinctual basis. Even if a dog was able to talk, it wouldn't be able to articulate in-depth concepts, or it wouldn't be able to develop sort of different conceptions. It would say basic things like, I want food, I want to sleep. That would be the extent to which a dog would be able to talk or communicate with us.
So we have a person in the comments who's named FF, who I've spoken with recently in comments on other videos. I think he joined our Discord server, so welcome to our Discord server, FF. He says in the comments, and I'll pitch this to you, SO, if you want to give your opinion on it. He says that I don't believe in minarchy, but I still vote for minarchists when possible because I can and I cannot choose anarchy. So I guess you want to give your position on voting.
Well, my position on voting is, well, I have two major criticisms of it, from a position of principle and from a position of sort of pragmatism, which I'd already sort of went over, that the state is not a philosophical entity. It has its own internalized interest, and that is not going to change based on the politician who is heading the state. Politicians all have a sort of uniform hegemonic interest to operate in a certain way and to do certain things. But the other problem with that, from my other criticism from a position of principle, is sort of as I'd explained before, fundamentally, the political system conveys a message that the use of political violence to establish your ends through legislative fiat is a libertarian approach, and I don't think one could argue that position. Now, you could fall back and argue, oh, well, what if we had libertarians working within the system? Well, aside from that being incredibly unlikely, because, as noted, there are structural incentives fundamentally against that. Let's say, for example, just hypothetically, that is the case. Well, what if someone like myself were to actually go out and engage in nonviolent action, which the state uses violence to suppress? Say that I sell some dope to one of my friends in the political economy, and a libertarian narc happens to, who's working within the system, happens to see that I did that. Well, the libertarian narc who's working within the system goes to the libertarian cop who's working within the system. The libertarian cop who's working within the system arrests me and my friend, and we go to a libertarian jailhouse, and we get sentenced to 15 to 10 years in prison by a libertarian judge who's also working within the system. My point being that it's kind of that saying someone is working within the system, you could say that that's a libertarian. All of those people are libertarians, and according to this idea, those would be libertarian actions, but fundamentally, there's nothing different has happened between them saying, in this scenario, with all these libertarian actors operating within the system, and, what we have now. So what I would argue is that this approach of trying to work within the system is it's sort of disassociated from lived reality, in the sense that it creates a disconnect between actions and intentions.
So we're getting piled up here on things I needed to talk about. So just really quickly on voting, I would say that 99% of your opportunities to vote are violations of the non-aggression principle, and most people would reference they would throw Spooner in my face and say, well, defensive voting is possible because other people are shooting their vote bullets at you, so by God, I'm going to shoot my vote bullets back at them. The problem with Spooner's analysis, as well as that defense, is that it's not a two-party situation. It's not one person firing vote bullets at you and you firing vote bullets, defensive vote bullets back at them. It's more accurately described as a three-party, or three groups involved in the situation. You have the people firing vote bullets at you, as well as the non-voters, And to respond with vote bullets would be to send those defensive bullets not just at the aggressor, but also at the third party that are not voting. So creating new victims can never be called self-defense. So in most situations that aren't like direct referendums repealing some government control, or in my case, which was my sort of experiment with the Not Governor campaign to see if it was possible to run a NAP compliant campaign, you know, that activists could vote for me for the purposes of spreading the libertarian message and you know, aggressing against no one and creating no victims through any political action I took. You know, aside from those two NAP compliant candidates and NAP compliant referendums, most other votes have victims, and it's not okay to create new innocent victims with your, you know, quote unquote defensive votes.
Well, the other problem there is that it assumes that it is sort of your same criticism. It assumes that it's two parties going against each other, but fundamentally, you know, you have to ask the question, why even are they fighting? Because they have conflicting interests and not just mutually associating with other people to have those interests met with like-minded people and leaving the other people alone. That's because this is a sort of false scenario. That's because they're both going through another organization, which is, of course, in this case, the state. And the state doesn't respond to elections. It uses elections as a tool of legitimacy in order to create a socio-political order within its political economy, so that people don't see the state as just a aimless, inconsistent hammer which could arrest them or kill them at any time. So essentially the purpose of, you know, before it was elections, the tool which states used quite often to justify themselves was religion. Before religion, it was, you know, you can go back to the very first states, and you know, there are various different philosophical concepts which the state uses as underlying tools, but can never fundamentally be consistent with, or because states are not philosophical firms. The point, though, that I'm making is it's not person against person. It's, you know, state against person, whether or not people vote. And all voting does fundamentally is work to legitimize a lot of these statist ideals about how the state is conceived of to work.
All right, so I'm way behind on comments. Rika says, I agree with Rose, but I still enjoy Steven's stuff. This is a very good point, an important point. Like, these people hold a lot of really good positions, and they have one that I disagree with. And that's okay. And I'll make my arguments, and they'll make their arguments, and everyone should be deciding for themselves. And I don't write entire people off because I disagree with them on one thing, because you know what? I'm going to be wrong and probably have been wrong and probably will continue to be wrong in some areas as we go forward. And, you know, just like with the non-aggression principle, I hope that other people will afford me the same respect that I afford them, which is like, look, we're all going to be wrong sometimes. And it's this fight over ideas that makes libertarians and voluntarists the most advanced, the most ethically perfect rubric to behave by, you know, in the world. It's because we constantly fight and tumble and push and pull over our ideas to refine them. So yeah, I want that battle. That
fundamentally, there are people, you know, there are plenty of people whose philosophical ideas, you know, some of them I take influence from and I find to be valid, while finding them overall to be, you know, someone that I disagree with on a fundamental basis, or someone who I don't know if I'd say right off would be the right word, but someone who I wouldn't cite as being sort of a figure overall of inspiration. I'll give you a good example. Peter Kropotkin, in attempting to make an argument against how one could demonstrate exclusive ownership over property, he incidentally made what I think is probably the best argument one could make against intellectual property, which was that everything which exists in his verbiage is a synthesis of other products in some form or another, and therefore it's difficult, if not impossible, to claim you came up with an idea or that an idea is fundamentally yours. Well, what he said is his argument was property, but if you take that as an argument against IP, it stands up fundamentally well, even though within its original propositional form, it was very inconsistent and had a lot of problems.
Let's see. So I keep skipping it, but he actually donated, so I should actually do his first. So Zachary Crowley, thanks for the $2. He is, I think, directing this question to you. Difference between Chartier and Rothbard.
Okay, well, the difference fundamentally between the sort of LMA crowd, left market anarchists, and Rothbard is, for one thing, while both groups are Austro-libertarians, as I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, scratch that, but they retain the messaging of libertarians from the early 19th century, whereas Rothbardians treat the current state of the political economy as a rough approximation of how social structures would be in a free market anarchy. The LMA crowd would argue that the sort of business structures and how businesses are organized are products of state-secured legal privilege and financial manipulation, because the only reason that they exist is because it costs so much to actually organize a firm, and certain models of organization are either incentivized or decentivized by sort of credit manipulation by various avenues of central banks, the FDIC, or these other state firms, which influence usury policies from banks. And there are some usury laws in general. So it's also gets into regulatory capture. The other problem, the other point to note, not necessarily a problem, but the other reason why LMAs would argue that business hierarchy would be significantly less abundant in stateless societies is because of diseconomies of scale, which beneficiaries of legal privilege are able to circumvent the cost burdens created by diseconomy of scale through utilizing various avenues of subsidy to externalize costs, which they would otherwise need to take into calculating the use of their resources. So basically, the LMAs recognize fundamentally that sort of social structures as they exist are products of state violence, even though the people organizing in in those models aren't necessarily using violence. The reason people find it beneficial to do so is fundamentally because of the state's influence in the market, whereas Rothbardians don't really, they skip the social question. And I think I would say I identify more with the LMA crowd, because I think their approach to Austro-libertarianism and Austrian economics in general carries a greater amount of explanatory power and is far more consistent.
Zach, sorry it took me a little while to get to your comment. I knew that was probably going to send him on a rant, and so I wanted to make sure that it flowed with the conversation and didn't just hijack whatever we were talking about. So sorry for delaying your comment. I do appreciate the donation. Fallstar says, "Damn it, Patrick, how the hell do you fix my voting conundrum with fucking vote bullets?" Thanks, man. You're welcome. Anytime. Let me know.
I tried to explain that as quickly as I could. I knew it was going to take a while, so that's why, even though I was seeing Zachary asking that question, I also just kind of ignored it until it was addressed by you.
All right. So, like I said, I think this... the audience that you're going to find on this channel is going to be, a mix of all types of libertarians, as well as anarcho-capitalists and voluntarists. And as this is an activist platform, we're actively looking to attract viewers that don't already understand this stuff. So is there maybe a conclusion or a message that you'd like to give to libertarians?
Yeah, for a stream about counter economics, I gotta say I'm kind of disappointed by, how little we actually talked about counter economics.
Oh, let's talk about counter economics some more.
Well, just what I was going to say fundamentally, the conclusion of counter economics, Rothbard, a lot of the criticisms, if there are any criticisms of counter-economic approaches to achieving political change, is sort of a misunderstanding in the sort of what counter-economists are proposing will be the basis of political change. You'll see a lot of people citing examples deliberately of very low demand industries, such as, trading jelly out of someone's garage and saying, oh, well, trading jelly out of your garage with bitcoin's not going to take down the state. Well, that's a counter-economic action, and sure, that criticism is valid, but that's not really what counter-economists are proposing will be the basis of achieving political change through this strategy. The strategy achieves political change because it creates sort of a subversive infrastructure to the state, because if there are enough counter-economic exchanges and firms which prop up enough entrepreneurs who are specifically finding it to be beneficial to undermine the state, then I sort of said this already, but yes, there will be people in pursuit of creating asset security around this trade. People will create networks or exchanges through which they can more consistently engage in counter-economic transactions. So, kind of like the stock market in the political economy would be not an example of counter-economics, but would be an example of something which is established specifically so that there is more consistent trade and asset security around a certain market. And examples we could see, I cited farmers markets early on, but farmers markets would be an example of a network like that, counter economists establish so that they can more consistently trade their produce. Produce probably being one of the best examples of a big counter-economic industry. Some areas of produce. Sure, there are places like Walmart, but there are a lot of there are millions of dollars traded through farmers markets, and many of them, at least the one locally, doesn't even use US dollars for a lot of the stands that are set up there. A lot of them take Litecoin or Dash.
So what he said is basically if enough people sell jelly out of their garage, it will end the state.
Yes and no. Selling jelly out of your garage itself is probably not going to do anything to the state. But if you target specific industries to speculate in and create firms around, you can create noticeable disruptive effects in the political economy because less people are trading in white market firms. Consequently, the state is making less revenue and also has a more difficult time tracking down people's transactions and obtaining revenue from their transactions. In fact, that's already functionally impossible because of cryptocurrency as is. And we haven't even talked about, end-to-end encryption and node-based networks, which are becoming increasingly common in online communication. And, I myself, created a speculative network aimed towards creating the most consistent form of end-to-end encryption. We've been referring to it as FNet, but that's basically what it is. It's a node-based distributed internet service where just sorry to if that sounds like I'm getting off topic, but I would like to mention that fairly quickly, that a lot of people who are concerned about the proprietary internet, well, the proprietary internet's probably not going to be a thing much longer because there are people, like myself and others who are involved in the FNet project and all of these other node-based the development of node-based distributed networks, which are fundamentally undermining these servers and proprietary internet service providers. But,
yes. So I want to make sure that, you're satisfied with our conversation. So I have about 20 minutes left. If you would like to, the floor is yours, man. What do you want to,
okay.
What do you want us to cover? Sorry. Before we continue, Verbal Armament says white market capitalism sounds scary and racist. Yeah. Wait. No, I got something for this. I got something. Hold on.
Racist.
Oh, I've been waiting to bust out some Alex Jones. Sorry. All right.
I don't know about, racist, but yeah, state, the sort of market infrastructure that the state has created is, not desirable for most people. It's just sort of passively accepted because there's not really anything else that's consistent as a means of obtaining income. But yeah, I think fundamentally, if agorists specifically want to have success, the industries which they ought to target, which would create the biggest ripples in the political economy, are not very low demand niche markets like garage jelly. It should be things like attempting to create more efficient and consistent ways of homebrew fuel, like algae oil. I don't know if you've seen that, but there have been leaps made recently in the creation of algae-based oil, which is cheaper to manufacture. It is more efficient and lasts longer than, fossil fuel-based oil. And on top of that, anybody can make it fundamentally. They just, set up a tub full of sewage water in their yard. It grows algae. You net the algae out of it, put it into a machine, which sort of I'm not entirely familiar with like the whole process, but it turns it into oil, essentially. That's something which within the last year or so has been expanded upon greatly. And I think counter-economists, if they were to make if homebrew oil were to become something which was consistent and anybody could do it, oh man, that would completely undermine central banking entirely, because it would make petrodollar recycling impossible. And the state uses the oil industry to bolster revenue through the manipulation of geopolitical events. So that would strike out one of the main ways in which the state is able to massively obtain funds for itself in short-term events. And that
roll
would
up
be
the sleeve, have the convulsion, and hail Satan.
God, I love him. All right. Yeah, no, that'd be awesome if we could make all sorts of stuff at home. There's a guy. Unfortunately, this is a point that I made a while back. Like a lot of ANCAPs are not very anti-corporation, obviously, and a lot of people on the left are. And what that has allowed the left to do more often than the quote-unquote right anarchists, the distinction that I disagree with, but let's roll with it, is that they seek to undermine the stuff that corporations are utilizing the government to leverage success from more than the anarchists on the right. A good example of that being a commie came out with sort of a home medicine brewing kit. I forgot the name of it, and I forgot the name of the guy. But, he's subverting patent and trade secret laws and undermining these giant medical corporations and pharmaceutical corporations by allowing people to literally craft in their own home medicines that would normally be extremely expensive to get, and that you couldn't actually compete on a white market with because of the government intellectual property dominance. And so what I found interesting is just that you don't see that coming from anarcho-capitalists very often, because they aren't typically looking to subvert the corporation. And I think that's a flaw. I think that's a mistake. I think when you have these massive corporations leveraging the guns of government for intellectual property purposes, that it's a fantastic idea to subvert that type of corporate behavior.
Well, also, as I've pointed out, there is a benefit the state has in trying to create these corporations and these industry cartels, because it allows them to sort of manipulate the behavior of these entities to a large degree for their own gain. And on top of that, it also they also make it so if there is a smaller amount amount of ways in which people are able to obtain revenue, that means that the state has an easier time obtaining revenue more consistently and doesn't have to spend as much trying to track down people's transactions. So I would agree fundamentally, and that's what libertarianism of the 19th century used to be, essentially, which I was explaining earlier. There was no split between those two groups. Libertarians were individualists who were, they advocated for the non-aggression principle, they would ethically argue for property ownership, and all these other points which ANCAPs argue, but they also recognized that the corporation and that the sort of fundamental structure of business was a product of state privilege and consequently state violence. So they were skeptical of both.
I just wanted to respond to a guy in the comments. They're having an entire debate here while we're talking. Patriot says, and I'm not even sure what it's about. Dude, the Hail Satan thing was a joke. It was just a meme for the lulz. I'm not suggesting that people worship the devil. So calm down. Deep breaths, people. It's a meme.
Okay, and what you were thinking of, by the way, is the Four Thieves Vinegar Collective, is what that group was called. And
the one making the at-home medicine chemistry set?
Right. Yeah. And that's a great example, actually, of a subversive counter-economic practice, because if you undermine the medical industry, the pharmaceutical industry is a major industry which is used by the state to bolster revenue for itself. This can be seen in sort of how psychiatry has been institutionalized, even though it's a known pseudoscience. Anyone who sort of examines psychiatry, can see how the method is essentially unfalsifiable, and a lot of it's essentially just geared towards the conclusion of people need to take more drugs for a lot of minuscule things, and it's also led to like 1 in 4 people being diagnosed as autistic, even though like 90 to 95% of them are just eccentrics, because according to the DSM-5's own standard for how someone can be diagnosed as autistic, it's a joke. Literally, it's a checklist with a bunch of nonchalant descriptions of things that most people would probably agree with in assessing themselves. For example, they have strong interests. That's literally one of the points. And if they score high enough, then they're autistic. That's actually how people are diagnosed as autistic, according to psychiatry. So it's
and another well thought out contradiction in that space is the oppositional defiance disorder. So you have a group of doctors that are the system that they have to go through and participate in to get that doctorate and to become licensed in that field to diagnose people with mental disorders is one in which you have to follow instructions to the letter. You have to participate in a top-down involuntary hierarchy. You have to meet with the approval of others. You have to be anything but defiant. You have to be anything but self-driven, self-motivated, and sort of like cocksure. Like, I'm going to do what's right no matter what they say is right or wrong. If you have that attitude, chances are you will not get very far in your attempts to become a licensed psychiatrist or whatever, practicing that type of medicine. And so it's no wonder in their DSM they write a disorder, because most of these people aren't the defiant personality type. So of course they're going to think that people that are defiant have a disorder and there's something physiologically wrong with them, deserving of medication. It's a joke.
And keep in mind that defiant it's a very subjective term, and so even in concept, something like ODD doesn't make any sense, because what is defiant is determined essentially by the doctor and the situation which that test was performed in, and therefore it really can't prove anything even in concept. But that would be a great example of another problem with psychiatry, which it is used politically as a weapon against dissidents. historically it always has been.
Oh,
in
yes.
In the Soviet Union, the government manufactured a mental illness, which there's no scientific basis for the existence of, known as sluggish schizophrenia. And that was used to put political dissidents in asylums. And we're seeing the same thing happening in the United States with ODD and ADHD, or a lot of these made up categories or things which do exist, but the prevalence of is exacerbated by the pseudoscientific methodology of psychiatry as a field of study, where you're seeing things like red flag laws being used to forcibly seize the guns of people who have things like ODD. In California, a kid who was diagnosed with ODD, a high school student, was literally put in an asylum, kind of like what, happened in the Soviet Union to people who had sluggish schizophrenia. So,
yeah.
And just back to the general point that I was making, if you, that would be a great industry for counter economists to target, to form these sort of speculative networks where everyone can contribute information freely through an informal, a Discord server would be a great example of the sort of format there, where people can come and go informally and they can contribute ideas without any sort of internalized penalty, and more resources can be speculated by more people. I would just argue that's not fundamentally the only way to speculate as an agorist. That's just the one I would argue fundamentally is the most efficient and the best way to get into agorist trade. But yeah, fundamentally, I would say the most important industries for agorists to target, which would make the biggest impact in the political economy, are three: communication, finance, and fuel. We already largely have decentralized finance fundamentally through means like cryptocurrency and decentralized exchanges of cryptocurrency. But we need end-to-end encryption for our communication as well, in order for sort of stable networks to be created around cryptocurrencies. And that's what is slowly but surely emerging with things like FNet. Another one recently was called not Flyly, I'm thinking of something else, but there was one that used an icon of a hot air balloon I'm blanking on the name of right now, but it was fundamentally the same thing as FNet. And I think probably within the next year or two, we're going to see, we're really close to being done with FNet, but even if FNet, something goes wrong with FNet, there are hundreds of other groups which have basically the same idea as we do. And once end-to-end encryption is established as a norm, once there's more utility to and more consistency in structuring servers and outlets of communication through that, that's basically game over, because it means that regulations and legislative fiat are impossible for the state to consistently enforce. Game over for the state, I mean.
So that was the first two. What was the third? Was fuel. Why is fuel an important consideration?
Because it would undermine central banking, because it would make petrodollar recycling inconsistent, and would make it it would essentially create it would crash all of the major fiat currencies of the world. It would cause them to default because they would have no ability to utilize OPEC for the sake of petrodollar recycling.
Okay, all right. Back up in the comments, Rick Robertson says, anarcho-capitalists are not for crony capitalism in any fashion, Patrick. Yes, that I guess I didn't make the point that I was trying to make clearly. So ANCAPs are not against all corporations. There are certainly some NAP-compliant, non-aggression principle-compliant corporations out there, ones that do not use the government to leverage themselves, get a leg up on other people or to extract profits from people, or through rent control and things like that. So I was just saying that the left is, especially the left anarchists, are pretty much against all forms of corporate hierarchy, which makes them distrustful and always looking to subvert all corporations. And so it's that a little bit of additional focus on subverting all corporations that has allowed them. There was some other decentralized solution that a commie came out with a couple of years before the medical one. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I'm just noticing that a lot of these decentralized, subversive solutions that are solving problems are coming from the commies because of their additional distrust or their blanket universal distrust of anything corporation related, whereas the capitalists, when somebody starts a company and does well ethically, the capitalists will cheer them on as opposed to trying to condemn everything that they do. So that was the point I was trying to get across. Of course, crony capitalism is something that anarcho-capitalists would be against. So that was what I wanted to say to that. Do you have... go ahead.
I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that, because a corporation itself is a legal privilege, essentially. The status of a firm being a corporation.
Oh, finally, we have a point of disagreement. So,
all right.
So a corporation, at its base, like when I start a company, and I've started many, it's a defensive maneuver. It's that people will be able to leverage the guns of government to come after me in ways that they shouldn't or wouldn't otherwise be able to if I didn't play that dumb game. So it's when you take it a step further and then utilize that corporation to leverage mechanisms of government to get a leg up that it becomes a problem.
And yeah, that's not me saying you're fundamentally going into it with the intention of being an aggressor, or that even necessarily you're directly initiating force, but the status of a corporation, I would argue, and the sort of business structure within the political economy, that's influenced fundamentally by state violence. And even in the scenario you provided, where if you didn't establish your firm as a corporation, if you didn't brown nose to the government for them to recognize you as a corporation in your hypothetical example, where people would, other businesses would exploit the use of government force or other legislative fiat to shut you down in the market, that's not... that's not a case for how corporations are NAP compliant. That's essentially conforming to my broader point, which is that the sort of incentives which cause the political economy to be structured the way it is are a product of state violence more broadly.
Yeah, I guess it's the same argument along the lines. Like, you get a driver's license as a defensive tactic to, keep from getting thrown in a cage for driving. You might register a copyright on a work to keep someone else from registering it for, maybe like a patent. You would register a patent on a work to keep somebody else from registering it first, and then forcibly using government guns to prevent you from, taking the actions that you would have otherwise been able to take So there's certain ways to participate defensively.
Yeah, that argument fundamentally it omits the fact it sort of creates a false dichotomy where it's either the owner of the firm initiating force against other people, or it's other people initiating force against the owner of the firm. No, it's the government initiating force against both of them.
Yeah, but the people that, take action to trigger the government to use its force are also party to the crime, in the same way, like, voters for Trump, are at least party to some extent or partially culpable for the 30 nut farmers that he recently participated in the murder of. We own the effects of our actions in that regard. So,
Right.
It's not only the government.
That still is not really an argument for how corporations are NAP compliant, though. Because what were you going to ask?
I was just going to ask you to clarify, and it sounded like you were about to.
Oh, okay. Well, because fundamentally what creates the violence there is the state. If the state wasn't there, people wouldn't be able to initiate violence against you. And that sort of incentive that you have, which, by the way, is not the only incentive to create a corporation. There are people who may be looking to become aggressors who may establish their firm as a corporation for the intention of going after local businesses. So it's just overall, I would say it's not a very compelling argument to say that corporations are NAP compliant, because some people might have the intention, might want to just be left alone. Fundamentally, the truth is, though, that the status of a corporation and the use of legislative fiat is still an act of violence, and people are being aggressed against.
When you're saying I am responsible for violence when I registered an LLC? Is that your argument?
If you've ever used the LLC to go after competitors, then yes.
Oh yeah, then we agree. We don't disagree. That was my entire point. That like registering a corporation isn't inherently a violation of the NAP. It's how you use it. It's like owning a gun is not a violation of the NAP. It's how you use it.
Well, it's not. It's not your violation of the NAP. Well, you may not be going into it with the intention to aggress upon other people, but the fact of the matter is that the government is violating the NAP.
So I think we're kind of over time, but if there's any other major points that you wanted to address, why don't we go for 5, 6, 7 more minutes? Is there anything else that we haven't gotten to?
I don't think that I would say so. This concept of left market anarchy versus Rothbardianism seems to be relatively interesting, and we could, maybe expand upon it more at a later point.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Because it does sound like it would be. It does sound like it would be a point of disagreement. Which, to clarify, fundamentally, my position is not of a sort of a lefty, not lefty, but of like a variety where I think force should be used against people engaging in enterprise or the exercise of exclusive ownership. My position is that the conditions which the political economy creates in the market today are products of state privilege and legislative fiat, and I think that a free market and anarchy, in other words, would be there would be a greater amount of competition, there would be a greater degree of autonomy in which people would be able to organize around. I think fundamentally a lot more people would be self-employed entrepreneurs. I don't think that the sort of structure of firm that exists today is really a reflection of a free market. And I think as well, because profit is relative, as well as the sort of material conditions and marginal preferences which people organize with. Because of that, I think that there are going to be just as many competing models of organization as well as firms which are competing. So free market anarchy, in other words, is very interesting, and it would take a whole model, a whole stream in and of itself to go over what I would argue are the implications of a completely stateless market.
All right, Esso. Well, thanks for being on the show. It's been interesting, and we've had some amazing audience engagement today. So I appreciate you guys' questions and lively discussion. Did you have any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, I saw some people in the chat going as far as to say, somebody said, "I love you, Esso," and my God, a lot of people tell me that I sound fine in streams, but just to me, I sound to myself, I sound as if I'm sort of rambly, bumbling, but no, apparently people have been loving it, and it's nice to see that.
All right. Well, cool. I'm glad the audience enjoyed it. Titus says he loves us both and he loves this channel. Thank you, Titus. I appreciate it. All right, guys. Well, if you want to continue this discussion, drop by our Discord server. The link is in the description on our website, disenthrall.me/platforms. Remember to, if you want to help the channel, we just literally signed up for Mixer yesterday. So if you want to drop over on Mixer, give us a sub or a follow or whatever the hell they call it on that particular platform. It'll probably help us get started. Facebook has banned the hell out of us, shadow banned the hell out of us. The last 3 days worth of posts have gotten like one person for their engagement, which I've never even seen before. So it's kind of comical at this point. I am going to be looking into spinning up. What'd you say?
Can I advertise my YouTube channel?
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, the name of my YouTube channel is Back Alley Philosophy, and I'm not the only person who uploads on there. In fact, my uploads have been kind of lacking recently. I also run the channel with another user named Filthy Heretic, who's pretty similar in both presentation and arguing style as I am. So if you enjoyed this discussion or want to see me explaining my praxis in greater detail, then it'd be great if you could subscribe, because yeah, YouTube is shadow banning the hell out of our channel. Like, it's comical, like you said on Facebook. Our videos used to get like 2,000 to 3,000 views each, and now they're getting like 600.
Oh man, the struggle is so real. Like, and it's even comical today. Let me pull this up from our Facebook page. They've got us on lockdown right now. It's like limits have been placed on Disenthrall. Could be due to activities from your page that don't comply with Facebook's policies. And all it says is we're not going to show your shit on feeds. Well, on your news feed, but that's literally the only place anybody gets content. Like, you don't surf Facebook by going and browsing through all the pages that you've liked. You just look at your feed and see the stuff. So like, we're getting absolutely no reach on anything. And at the same time as they put that banner up at the top that was like, "Oh, we're limiting your reach right now," they're like, "Oh, by the way, you can buy some ads from us and we'll advertise for you." It's like, fuck you. You don't destroy my page, shadow ban me, and then ask for money. Get the fuck out of here. What? You guys are insane, like clinically insane.
What do you think it was which finally got Facebook to do that?
I know exactly what it was. It was we did a second follow-up interview with an on-the-ground activist that went to Hong Kong and fought on the streets, and now he's back temporarily in Dallas. He's going to go back in. He's going to go back to Hong Kong, and so we did an interview with him, and we talked about what was going on over there. And the moment that stream was over, Facebook took the video down off our Facebook page, said that we violated their community standards, and then the next day they took our page down. So apparently we're not allowed to talk about Hong Kong on Facebook. And, you know, I just said those words, so we're probably going to get this video taken down on Facebook. But I'm starting to not care. I'm just tired of these companies controlling our stuff. That's why I'm motivated to roll up my own version of Gab. Like, I've kept my mouth shut because there's so many really crappy social networks that have popped up over the past 3 years, and they're all pretty much terrible. I can't stand MeWe. I like all the Minds is okay, but and like Gab is the closest one I've seen to like actually doing it right. So I'm about ready to be like, look, guys, I think we finally have the competitor. But because it's a federated server type platform, rather than say, hey, go sign up on Gab, I'm going to roll my own Disenthrall server that I know things aren't going to get censored on unless they are not NAP compliant, obviously. And we'll see how that goes. So as soon as that's ready, I will make a video.
Gee, sounds like you could use a subversive counter-economic solution.
Yeah, so maybe you'll have to tell me about yours. Maybe when it's closer to being released or whatever, we can do a follow-up video on that.
Yeah, our planned release is the end of December. That's for strategic reasons more than it is where we're at, because I like right now we're at sort of the end stretch of developing the components of FNet. Like, I'd say it's probably going to be done completely by maybe mid-November, but we have a guerrilla marketing strategy would be the best way to describe it, which a couple of us in the network contributed to and developed over the summer, and it does require it being put out by the end of December. And it is essentially going to guarantee that FNet is a mainstream political subject matter. And for the sake of, because it's going to, it's going to rely heavily on exploiting the media. I'm not going to go too much into detail about what exactly the plan is, but let's just say it's going to become a major election topic.
I can't wait then. I like major election topics. All right, Todd Rankles in with the $25 super chat. He says, love both of you mofos. Dude, thank you so much for the donation. That is awesome. Anything else?
Sound like a nice guy too. I was just talking to your person who donated that.
Yeah. Anything else? So I'm going to close it out.
Anything else that I have to say? Agora Anarchy Action use the subversive counter-economy to destroy the state by making it fundamentally incapable of functioning. That's historically been the way in which most libertarian successes have been established. Anybody who wants some material to look up, research the American Letter Mail Company. That was a major political achievement achieved at a time where the amount of people who identified as libertarians would have probably been in the high double digits.
Crowd goes, ah, ah.
Oh, no. Oh, man. No, that was like an insulting clap. I thought that was going to be like a yay, happy clap. Sorry, that was not intended to be. I thought it was going to be like a crowd clapping. Apparently, that was Alex Jones clap. Sorry. I got to get my memes in order. All right, guys. The last thing I wanted to mention was Larkin Rose has been doing a thing where every single day he does like a quick 5 to 15 minute little rant, and he gives it to all of the people that subscribe to his work at like a $5 and above level. And I was thinking about doing the same thing here for our subscribers. So if that sounds like, because I always have these little things that I just want to rant about really quickly, but they don't deserve full-on live streams and stuff like that. So I was considering doing the same here. If that's something that you guys would be interested in, please let me know. Maybe, because I'm looking for ways to really reward the people that actually go out of their way to, you know, hook us up on our Subscribe Star and things like that. So if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, let me know, and maybe I'll try a couple and we'll see how it goes. But I want to really thank the Subscribe Star and Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome, and you make it possible to pay for the trips to the protests and a lot of the real life stuff that we do. Oh, and I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't point out that Feed the Need 2019 is coming up December 7th in Dallas, Texas. If you want to actually put boots on the ground and see what some quote-unquote real activism is like, where we actually defy government armed to the teeth to break immoral laws, that's coming up December 7th. We're going to be feeding the homeless. We're going to be bringing tents and picking people up off the concrete in the middle of winter here in Texas and giving them, you know, at least a sleeping bag and a tent and a warm belly to get through the night in for Christmas. And all of those things are illegal now in Texas, feeding the homeless, giving, you know, them sleeping in tents and all of the above. So we're going to, you know, get strapped and go do some good. That is December 7th. You can find the event currently on Facebook. If you are in Dallas, in and around Dallas, or just want to travel here, every year it's getting bigger. Last year we had over 100 armed individuals doing good in the world. It is an event that, I mean, you'll never feel anything like it. It's amazing. And it sends a great message to the normies too. So like the tagline for the event this year that I suggested is, you know, cause they're always arguing. The left is always saying the Second Amendment's for hunting, and the right's always like, no, it's not. It's for like, you know, resistance to tyranny and self-defense or whatever. Like, this is the perfect example. The Second Amendment is for feeding the homeless when the government makes that illegal. It's for resisting the tyranny of preventing us from feeding people and preventing people from sleeping on the concrete. That's what the Second Amendment was originally for. So it's a really good message. What'd you say, Esso?
Oh, and something I was going to say is, yeah, another thing that the state likes to do a lot is demagogue to the poor and try and utilize like sort of class divides. Well, if you look at how the homeless people have been treated by the government, it's absolutely disgusting. And a lot of these sort of charity foundations, such as the Cajun Navy, which try and help people out during natural disasters, you know, they will get forcibly, they will be told to leave by FEMA and the government, and then the government won't do anything. And yeah, and there are examples way worse than what you're describing in Texas. I think this one was in Kansas last year, where people set up a stand to try and do what you were doing, and police came and poured bleach on all the food so homeless people couldn't eat it. Yes,
that is absolutely true. Here's the Facebook event. You can look it up if you'd like to. They arrested the group in Florida. They also arrested a church group in Texas. They rounded up a group of churchgoers that were feeding the homeless and imprisoned them, and they fought it in court for 2 years. And the result of all of that was that they just slightly loosened the laws to make it so you can feed the homeless as long as you don't feed too many. And so we're still going out there, and we've done it for, this will be the seventh year? Seventh? This will be the 7th consecutive year that we've done it armed to the teeth and we get left alone. Imagine that. So if you're going to be in the area, I invite you to come out and participate in that activism with us. All right, guys. It's been cool. Good conversation. Great chatting with you guys, and I will catch you guys later. Thanks for watching.